Have you ever thought of taking 3 weeks out of your life to explore a part of your own country you've never seen before? Well, I certainly have, and that's exactly what I did. Join me for the adventure of a lifetime as I make my way around the stunning state of Queensland, Australia by rail. Alright, well, welcome to the sort of final part of Queensland by rail, or you can call it a prologue, whatever. This is all about how I planned and budgeted for my trip to Queensland, and I ultimately hope that you get something out of this, and this helps you better plan your 3-week adventure, be it to Queensland or somewhere else. So before I get started, I really just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has watched and supported the series. The support has been amazing, and it all turned out better than I could have hoped. Yeah. So, how to plan for a 3-week trip. I'm going to bring you onto my computer and I'll go through it. So, the first step in planning your 3-week adventure, I suggest starting with a document. Just start to set up some sort of place where you're going to have all of your information and you're going to write down anything as you find it out. And at the end, you know, not only will you have a great place for all the information that you need, but there's going to be a lot of, well, you can send that document to any family or friends who might be just interested in following along your journey. And, you know, it is always nice to keep somebody informed at home about, you know, how you're going and what you're going to do, that sort of thing. You know, can be just purely for them to follow along, or it can be, you know, just a simple check that everything's running well and you're all okay. Anyway, exactly how you set up your document is up to you. I'll briefly scroll through it and you can sort of get an idea of how I ended up setting it all out, but honestly, it doesn't really matter, and it's just whatever works the best for you. I sort of figure it out as I go myself for any sort of trip that I plan. And yeah. So once you have started your document, and just, I don't know what sort of information you know to begin with, but a good, you know, beginning is to figure out where exactly you want to go. So I'm here on the Queensland Rail Travel website, and this is the network map for their long distance services. And this gives you a pretty good idea of where I wanted to go. I knew that I wanted to travel at least once on all of these main routes. And to begin with, I didn't know the exact order I was going to be doing things in, because each of the trains run on slightly different schedules. They don't run every day of the week, so it's just something to consider. And yeah, so because all of these trains run on slightly different schedules, they might not be available during the times that you most want them to. So the general gist of my planning was I knew that I wanted to go to Charleville, for example, spend a day or two in Charleville and then return or, go somewhere else. And so you just have to really start planning and come up with a basic itinerary in your head and just roll with it and see if you can make it work. If not, you might have to change it. For example, when I was planning, I started out by thinking I'd do the Westlander, then the Spirit of the Outback, then Spirit of Queensland, then the Inlander. Turns out when I wanted to travel on the Spirit of the Outback, it was not running due to track works. So that was thrown out the window and I had to plan everything again. Now, how did I start figuring out whether it was going to work out or not? Well, I went to the particular train that I wanted to go on and I saw it. It says departs Brisbane Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7:15. So I went over to my calendar and you can see here I've laid everything out. I've put in the Westlander Tuesday 7:15. So that's my first thing, because I know that's not that flexible, right? So then I needed to decide, okay, when am I going to get to Brisbane and how am I going to get to Brisbane? I decided that I was going to fly to Brisbane because that would allow me the most time in Brisbane and it would also be slightly cheaper than taking the train. So that's what I did. And I looked up, the cheapest flight and for the day I wanted to travel, and 7 a.m. Tiger Air, as you saw. So I then sort of repeat that process where I'm now in Charleville and I'm like, okay, I want to return to Brisbane and I want to return on the Friday, for example, because if I look at the Spirit of Queensland, it departs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday. So I decided Friday would be a good time to travel. And, I wanted to be back. So I went to this website, roamtorio.com. It's a great website for, it's a journey planner, right? For any two locations anywhere. And they'll have a lot of options. And I found it really helpful. So you can see here that the two main options that are going to be affordable to me and practical are the bus or the train. I decided that, the bus was the only option because the train wasn't running on a Friday. Because if you go back to here, you can see, well, it does depart on a Friday at 6:15 p.m, which would get me into Brisbane on the Saturday. And just would mean I'd have less time in Cairns and stuff. So Bus Queensland it was, and you can see they've got a Brisbane to Charleville service, and I looked up their timetable. Departs Charleville at 12:20 and gets back into Brisbane at 12:10. So it's almost a 12-hour bus ride, but you do get some meal stops where you can stretch your legs and stuff, so that's not too bad. Long distance coaches are a great way to travel if you're on a budget. If you weren't on such a budget, maybe you'd fly back. Up to you. I'd say even if you can afford the flight, why not give the bus a try? Might be just a different experience. But anyway, so punched in the bus time into my calendar, and you can see now that it really helps you visualize where all of your services are. And next was Spirit of Queensland, obviously. So you get the idea that I'm just sort of plotting in which services I want to go on and looking at their times, putting it in and working around things like, I want to stay in Cairns for 3 nights. And that would give me 2 full days to do stuff. I sometimes had to make compromises, like I would have liked to stay in Townsville a bit longer than the 24 hours I got, but it just so worked out that it was more beneficial for me to take the Inlander to Mount Isa and get a bit more time in Mount Isa. Similar thing with Longreach. The bus Queensland from Mount Isa to Longreach runs every day, so I could decide whether I wanted to travel on the Friday or the Saturday. And what that would mean is either I get 1 day in Mount Isa and 2 days in Longreach, or the other way around. And I decided that there would be more than I wanted to do in Mount Isa than Longreach. So, yeah. I would have, and really, ultimately, I really wanted to spend 2 days in each. And yeah, it's just the way it worked out. So yeah, you get the idea, just punching things in, things like the XPT, that runs daily, so no worries there. And with the XPT, I wanted to travel in the daylight on both trips. There is the option, I know it's an option for the Sydney to Melbourne one. I'm not sure about Brisbane to Sydney. I'm pretty sure it is. In fact, yeah, it is. There is an overnight service and there's a daylight service. If you have done the XPT before, then maybe the overnight suits you better because you're not necessarily looking out for the scenery, and let's say you want to have the experience of sleeping on the XPT. So, could be something for you. For me, I hadn't travelled on either route by train, so I wanted to be in the daylight for both. It's just these sort of decisions you make. Once you've planned out the big items of where you need to be, roughly city-wise, and how you're going to make these big connections, then it's a good idea to look up your accommodation. I used pretty much whatever was cheapest at the particular area. So I stayed in an Airbnb in the middle of Brisbane. That was like $25 a night, something like that. Could I have stayed in a youth hostel for cheaper? Yeah, probably. But that I wouldn't get my own room. So I just thought I'd be willing to spend the extra $10 or whatever it would be to just get my own private Airbnb. And they didn't have to be fancy. I just wanted a bed for the night, pretty much, because I knew that for anything other than the night, I would be out making the most of my time in wherever I was. Sometimes there were no cheap Airbnbs available in a town, and they're all sort of on the more expensive side. And in that case, I stayed at caravan parks in a small one-man tent. Maybe that's a bit too rough for you, but for me, that was alright. So once you sorted out all of your accommodation, then you start to look up all of the attractions that you want to do. And, you know, if there's certain tours you want to go on, like this underground mine tour or the Qantas Founders Museum, it's a good idea to pencil these into your schedule just so you've got record of them. And how do I find about them? You just Google it. You just Google, you know, things to do in Mount Isa, things to do in Longreach. And all of the major attractions will come up. Now, I might note for Cairns that for this day, the Sunday, you can see I've got nothing scheduled there. And I decided that I was just going to use that day to wander around town myself and just do a bit of exploration on my own accord, and that I didn't want to book any tours or anything. So that might be something that you do. Now, as you look up all of these stuff, put them into your document. You know, might be a good idea to put times in. It's especially a good idea to put prices in. And yeah, it just saves you the hassle of looking them all up later, looking up all the prices later. Just do it as you go, and anything that you missed, yeah, of course you can fill it in later. I'll note that sometimes I did want to pay a little bit extra for an upgrade. For example, first class Longreach to Brisbane on the Spirit of the Outback. And yeah, that was worth it for me. Something for you to research whether that is worth it for you, the upgrade. And if you do want to do it, then it might be handy for you to visualize the price difference between the upgraded tickets and the base tickets. I'll note that I've put down here 240 volts. This was a big consideration for me, was how long I'm going to have between access to power points. And because, you know, I've got all my camera equipment and stuff, I'm using it quite a bit. I always want to have enough power with me. Now, I've personally got 5 batteries for my camera, so that lasts me a few days. But anything more than a few days, and I really want to start thinking about where I'm going to charge my stuff. I've been on trips in the past where I have not thought about where I want to charge my stuff, and I've run into issues with limiting resources for charging my stuff. So if you're like me, you've got a lot of camera equipment, you're using it a lot, that might just be something to consider. So, you know, I knew that each night that I was going to be in an Airbnb, great, that's an opportunity to charge things up. Caravan parks, if I'm staying in tent, I can't really charge my stuff up overnight because obviously I'm going to be in an unpowered spot, but I can, say, spend the evening in the caravan park, like, you know, I might go get some pizza for dinner and bring it back to the caravan park, eat it there, and while I'm eating dinner, have all my stuff charging. And then I might read a book after dinner and just stay in the camp kitchen. You know, there's obviously going to be PowerPoints there. Just all these little things to consider so that you don't run out of power. But if you're just doing it on your own and you don't have any camera equipment or that sort of stuff to worry about, or you just don't use it as much as I do, then it might not be something you have to really worry about. So, once you've got your prices for your attractions and your transport, which are going to be the main things, or in your accommodation, then I like to have a summary of expenses type thing, and, you know, I'm just writing down each of the figures, and I'm just calculating here how much I anticipate to spend on food. So, you know, it was $30 a day, and yeah, obviously sometimes, like, I've put down 20 days when the trip was like 21, 22 days, something like that. And that was because, yeah, I've included food on one of the days, which was on the Spirit of the Outback. So I don't need to worry about the cost of food on that day. Also for accommodation, you can see here, some nights I was on a train, so I don't need to worry about accommodation there. And sometimes I was staying at a friend's place or something like that. So again, didn't need to worry about costs there. You might not have the same luxury of staying in a friend's place, so it's just something to consider. Your accommodation prices might be a little bit more expensive. I just wrote down the total cost, not necessarily on a per night basis. If I was staying for multiple nights, yeah, you can see here, just a personal choice. You can lay it out a different way if you like. Once I'd figured everything out, I wrote down a brief summary of what I was going to be doing each day. I didn't tend to refer to this much when I was actually travelling, but it's a good thing if you're sending it to a family member, something like that. Yeah. So all the times that I booked for transport, attractions or accommodation, I know that is definitely going to be fixed, and there's no way that's going to vary on my trip. But something like food, you know, I wasn't cooking any of my meals. I was eating out at local restaurants, pubs, whatever was there at the time. So it could well be that you end up spending more than $30 a day, or if you decide to cook all of your meals yourself, then that $30 can come down to maybe $20 a day. So it's all up to you. Any sort of food purchases, that sort of thing, I made sure to put that on my credit card. That way I could go back through my statements and see when I came back from Queensland, did I stay under budget? And turns out I did. I wasn't necessarily being careful on each and every day whether or not I was spending within my $30 limit. I was just eating what I felt like eating, pretty much, without going too fancy. And yeah, that really, I really wanted to test whether I was going to come under budget doing that sort of thing. And the result was yes. So that was great. You might also want to include a bit of money set aside for buying souvenirs or that sort of thing. I am not a big souvenir collector, but I did buy a couple of things. Probably spent in total maybe $50, if that, on souvenirs and that sort of thing. So it's up to you what you really want to do. If you want to include that in your summary of expenses or not. For me, to be honest with you, I forgot about it while planning the trip, but it turned out alright because the money I saved from not buying $30 worth of food every day, I think I ended up spending $27 on food, something like that, but the money that I saved over the whole trip was enough pretty much to cover all of my expenses with souvenirs and that sort of thing. I was originally planning I wanted to spend less than $3,000, and as you can see, I spent about $2,700, and so yeah, it was a successful trip in budget-wise. I think that it's always good to have an idea of what you're going to spend up front so that you can make sure you've got enough money set aside. And even if you know that you've got more than enough money set aside, I think it's good to just be aware of what sort of expense you're up for. Helps you just better plan things in the future. If I came back from this trip and I found, I actually spent $35 a day on food, then that would be something for me to consider for my next trip. Do I want to be more conscious of my food expenditure, or do I just want to budget for $35 a day? All those little things, and yeah, I'm sure that you'll encounter stuff like that, and it will, you'll plan your trip slightly differently to me, but you'll have a slightly different trip to me. So yeah, I really encourage you to do something like this. If you can afford it, it's awesome. I can't tell you the amount of people who I have talked to about this trip, and they've said, that's so great. Young people like you are, spending it all on booze and material goods, and here you are getting out there exploring the world. So, yeah. This is achievable for anyone my age. I was 21 at the time when I did this trip. Even if you're younger, I think if you work towards it, you can definitely do it. So I hope that I've ultimately inspired you to go on a similar trip and start planning your own adventure. So, yeah. Thanks very much for watching, and subscribe if you haven't already. Share my videos to anyone who you think might be interested. I appreciate all the support I can get, and just honestly, thank you for continuing to watch. Hope you enjoy any future series that I might do. See you later.